Welcome back. On our previous session, we talked about quality assurance and we also mentioned test automation. But now we will have the opportunity to talk more about test automation, to go in depth into that. And our next speaker actually is a test automation and performance testing specialist. He's helping software development teams reach rapid delivery of high quality software through the techniques he is an expert at. Please welcome Aleksandar Zeljković, and he will talk about the elements of test automation. Aleksandar, hello.
Hi, hello.
Can we hear each other well?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you as well.
Okay.
Great. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you for this warm introduction. Yeah, I think this presentation will be a good follow-up after the previous one. In this presentation, we will talk about the test automation. It won't be very technical, so we will grasp some basic concepts and some general things related to test automation. We will not go deep into details. Okay. Before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Aleksandar and I live in Novi Sad, Serbia. I'm a software engineer specialized in test automation and performance testing. Currently, I'm working as a test automation engineer at TimeShift, where we are making an awesome workforce management tool for Zendesk. If you want to know more about me, feel free to visit zeljković.sh. You have a QR code which will lead to the exact same address. There you can find a bit more information about me and my background. And also you can find some blog posts that I'm writing about web cloud, test automation, performance testing, and similar. Okay, so today we are going to cover the following topics. First, we'll see why do we automate testing, why do we need test automation, and what is the test automation in a nutshell. Then we will see what can be automated within testing and what should be automated. We will quickly see what are the basic test automation requirements, and finally I will share some tips and tricks with you that will hopefully help you in your test automation journey. So first, let's see why do we automate testing. In order to give answer to this question, we will quickly define test automation, and we will define test automation by defining testing and automation in separate. So let's see what is the software testing. There is a million of different definitions of software testing, and basically I love this one the most. The software testing is the process of gathering information about software. I think that in a nutshell, testing is providing an information about the system under test. So whenever I need to test something, I feel responsibility to provide certain insight about that particular feature or system or whatever. Is it working as expected? Does it perform well? Is it secured? And so on and so on. So my duty is to provide certain useful insights to my development team and the business owner so they can further drive development of the product. Next, what is automation? This is a general automation definition from the internet. Automation is the use of technology to perform tasks with reduced human assistance. So obviously, when we want to automate something, we want to somehow reduce human assistance in a certain task. Next question is, why should we reduce human assistance in any activity? Again, I'm still not talking about strictly test automation. First of all, there is a lot of repeatable tasks out there, and we as humans, when we are doing something over and over again, which is not challenging for us, we are losing our motivation, we are losing our focus, we don't want to do it anymore. So that is a good place for certain machine or a software to take over and to do that repeatable job instead of us. Also, there is a lot of slow tasks where, again, we as humans are very slow in execution certain stuff. For example, some difficult calculations, sometimes we need hours to do them. And on the other side, software can do it in a couple of milliseconds. So those tasks are also good candidates for automation. Error-prone stuff. So in a human task execution, we have different factors that can impact the task itself. So we are making errors, we are tired, we are demotivated to do something, we have our personal issues that affects us. Machines don't have those problems, and they can execute tasks without those certain side factors that affects humans. So there is a variety of tasks out there where machines are much better in execution of them than we humans are. So that leads us to the core topic. Why do we need test automation? So in the past, for example, when we had a V model as a software development methodology, I will simplify it for this explanation. We had some design phase, then we had development, then we had a testing phase. We knew exactly what will be the scope of the testing. And once the testing is done, we are shipping the whole product, and that's it, besides the maintenance phase, of course. Then suddenly Agile came into play, and suddenly we want to deliver every sprint. So we want to deliver every week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We are having our core product and we are adding some features on top. And basically we need to test again and again and again the same thing. So we have a repeatability in our testing. We cannot manage to do that manually every sprint. And suddenly there is a high need for test automation. We need some machine or a software to help us to test faster. So we want to make sure that our application is not broken with these new functionalities, and we don't have enough time and manpower to do it. So test automation comes into place. Then in the last couple of years, with the rise of DevOps, suddenly we are not satisfied with releasing once per sprint anymore. That's too slow. We want to release faster. We want to release as soon as the feature is done. So we are having daily releases, or we are even having multiple releases per day. So we are having tens to 100 releases per 1 day. This is extreme situation, basically. We need to test again and again and again to verify, does the core functionalities of our product are working as expected. So in that kind of development practice, you cannot even work without test automation. So it is impossible to keep the track without test automation to help you to test fast and to be able to release with a satisfying amount of confidence. Also, modern applications are very huge and complex. We have a lot of frameworks, a lot of tools, subsystems out there, and it's getting harder and harder to test that manually. That's also where test automation comes into place to help us with those complex systems. From the business perspective, we have competition somewhere out there on the market, and the competition is constantly trying to release some cool features before us to take over a part of our customers and to take over some part of our money. We don't want to give our money to anyone. We love money. So we need to release before our competition too. That is also where we need to release as soon as possible. We don't have a time to wait. But also when we release, we want to make sure that we have released a good and stable product, that there is no regression, that there is no newly introduced bugs, that everything is working as expected for the customers in order to keep those customers and to gain a new one. So in a nutshell, this is why today test automation is more important than ever before. Okay. let's move to the next chapter and let's see which aspects of testing can and should be automated. I will start with three foundational types of automated tests. Those are unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests. So what are the unit tests? Basically, unit tests are tests that cover a single unit of code, either function or a method. Unit tests are ideally written by developers even before the code under test is written. This methodology is known as TDD, test-driven development. Be aware, TDD is not a testing technique. It's a development technique and methodologies where unit tests are written up front as a part of good design practice as well. Integration tests, and sometimes known as service tests, are basically whenever you have some type of integration between code classes, APIs, system, subsystem, microservices, whatever, you can probably write some kind of integration test. This is a very broad term, and it's basically, it has different meanings in different teams. But anyhow, whenever you integrate something into something and you're testing that in an automated manner, those are automated integration tests. I think the best example of this are API tests, where you are basically testing integration between backend and frontend, or between different backends that are communicating via certain API. Third type, end-to-end tests, also known as UI tests sometimes. This is technically incorrect because UI can be tested in isolation, then it is not end-to-end. So basically, end-to-end tests are tests that are covering certain user scenarios across the whole application. So you are basically opening the browser, for example, and you are testing some use cases that your customer tomorrow would do in an automated manner. Next, let's cover the model of the testing pyramid. Not perfect, but pretty simple and good for catching some basic concepts. As you can notice, test pyramid has three layers: unit, integration, and end-to-end layer. What is important to notice here is that the volume of the unit part is the largest, volume of the integration part is a bit smaller, and volume of the end-to-end part is the smallest. So these three layers should represent the number of different types of tests that you ideally should have in your test suite. Or to be more precise, the proportion of unit, integration, and end-to-end layers represent the proportion of the amount of these tests in your project. So you ideally should have the largest number of unit tests, then a smaller number of integration tests, and the smallest number of end-to-end tests. Why? Because unit tests are the fastest to write, fastest to maintain, fastest to execute. You can run thousands of them in a couple of seconds. So they are basically the cheapest type of tests. Next, integration tests are a bit more complex. They are a bit more difficult to create and to maintain. They are a bit slower. So you should have a proportionally smaller amount of integration tests. And on the top level, end-to-end, when you are doing end-to-end test automation, it is the most complex way of testing. It is difficult to create a good preconditions, to write tests. They are slowest to execute them. You need to prepare the whole application if you want to do end-to-end testing. So they are the most expensive. You might ask then, why shouldn't we use just unit tests and cover everything with unit tests if they are so good, fast, cheap, whatever? The answer is these three types of tests are all catching different types of issues. That's why you need all of them. I said ideally. That's not all. Those three types of tests are the foundation, but there is a lot more things beyond that that needs to be tested in a realistic project. Some examples are performance testing. You want to know how your application performs under a certain load, how many users can use it simultaneously, what will be the response time, will your application fail? If your application fails, how it will recover, and so on and so on. So this is very important. Security, a hot topic nowadays, because our applications are very often dealing with confidential data, with money. We can hear a lot of examples where certain companies were attacked by ransomware. So we need to protect our infrastructure and protect our application from unauthorized access and malicious intentions of different people. Visual appearance provides a good user experience, and you want to make sure that your application works well on different screen sizes, on different devices, that layout is good, that it looks nice, that we don't have some overlapping elements. And this should be verified as well through the practice called visual regression testing, for example. Accessibility, we need to make sure that people with disabilities can use our application in a proper way. For example, screen readers must be capable of reading our application aloud, or our application should ideally be used by a keyboard only. There is a lot of accessibility standards out there for different disabilities. Definitely you need to make sure that you know those standards, to know which tools you have, and to test and automate this aspect as well, if this is the risky aspect for your business, of course. Okay, so now let's see what are the requirements and prerequisites for test automation. We have three main aspects here: people or skills, tools, and infrastructure. Let's start with the skills. The usual practice in development teams is that test engineers or QA engineers or test automation engineers, or whatever you call them, are doing test automation. This strictly doesn't have to be the case. Basically, anyone who has a proper set of skills can do a test automation on your project. So developers can do test automation as well if they are having enough skills. Business people in certain cases, so it's more about skills than about people and how will you call that role, basically. For foundational types of skills essential for test automation, testing, first and most important, of course. The dedicated person for test automation needs to know how to test, how your application works, the technical background of the application, what are the risks that you are having and that you want to cover with testing in order to write good tests and to automate them further. Next important skill is coding. In most of the cases, your test automation will be code, so this is mandatory skill as well. Test automation tools, practices, and frameworks. Again, person dedicated for test automation in your team needs to know which approach to take in certain context, which tools there are out there for test automation, which frameworks, how to connect the dots. So that particular person needs to have certain background and knowledge about the general test automation concepts. Fourth skill or group of skills is CI/CD setup and configuration, very often overseen because once you're having your automated test, you need to run them somewhere, and usually that somewhere is a CI/CD pipeline. Those tests needs to be configured in the CI/CD pipeline. Data need to be prepared. Some report needs to be generated there. Appropriate person needs to be alerted when something fails, and so on and so on. So this is a very important component of test automation, CI/CD setup and configuration. Next aspect are tools. There is hundreds and thousands of tools used for test automation. I will here just quickly show 5 example groups of test automation tools. I will share their purpose and how will you approximately choose a tool in your team. So first of all, unit testing tools. We saw what unit tests are a couple of slides ago. In order to run unit tests, we need a unit testing framework, but not only for unit tests, you need unit testing framework very often for your API and end-to-end tests, because unit testing framework is on top, and unit testing framework is basically doing the assertion in your test. You're giving expected and actual result to it, and unit testing framework will tell you did test pass or fail. Some examples are Jest for JavaScript, PyTest for Python, JUnit, Java, PHP unit for an obvious programming language, and then unit for .NET. As you can see, unit testing frameworks are usually based on the programming language that you are using, and for every programming language, you usually have 2 or 3 major test automation frameworks, and with some additional criteria, you will pick the appropriate one for your project. Next, API testing tools. API testing tools are usually an API library for sending HTTP requests, and on top you are having, as I said on the previous slide, unit testing framework. So for example, if you want to do an API testing in Python, you will probably use request as an HTTP library, and on top you will, for example, use PyTest to make assertions. Same thing for rest assured, which is the HTTP library for Java, and on top you will use either JUnit or TestNG probably. Postman is a bit different. To send an HTTP request in Postman, you don't need to write code. Postman has its own UI, and also Postman has its own testing framework integrated, so you don't need anything else to test APIs with Postman, since it has integrated testing framework and Chai assertion library as well. End-to-end testing, there is a million tools out there, and I think 4 most popular and most powerful today are these 4 that you can see on your screen. In Cypress and WebDriver, tests are written strictly in JavaScript. In Selenium and Playwright, you can pick your programming language since it has a language bindings. Also, what is the difference between these are, for example, supported browsers. Also, the architecture of the tool itself is different, and it brings some additional considerations. So when you're picking your end-to-end tool, there will be a lot of things to consider, and then you will find which tool matches your expectations. When it comes to performance testing, I think most popular tool is definitely JMeter, at least at this moment. Probably something will change in the future. JMeter, again, does not require coding. It has, similar to Postman, its own UI, where you can just set up your tests. On the other side, in K6 and Locust, tests are written as a code, where in K6 tests are written as JavaScript, and Locust is a Python framework. Besides that, what else you need to consider is the number of plugins and some helping tools. Also, they are supporting different number of protocols, so you need to know which protocol you want to measure. Again, these are some examples of how will you consider which performance testing tool to choose. CI/CD. Not strictly a testing tool, but again, very important aspect in test automation. So you will probably not pick CI/CD tool as a part of your test automation stack, but you will have to deal with CI/CD tool a lot. So it would be nice if you know how to use it and know the internals. Few examples, GitHub Actions, very awesome modern CI/CD tool for GitHub users. Jenkins, probably the most popular tool out there, and GitLab. GitLab is really a Swiss knife, I would say, of CI/CD. Really a lot of cool features. I will not go deeper into this topic because I think we could have a 3-hour discussions only about CI/CD tools, but that's not the topic today. Okay, third prerequisite for test automation is the infrastructure. So be aware that whenever you need to test, you need to prepare your application under test. This is especially demanding for end-to-end testing and performance testing, since you ideally want to prepare a production-like environment where you will test. So basically, you need to pay that infrastructure, which is production-like. You need to set it up. You need to configure it. That all takes time and it takes money. So calculate this into your test automation effort calculation. CI/CD pipeline, I already mentioned this. I will not go deep into that aspect again. Devices, when you're doing the testing, you will probably want to know how your application works in different browsers. If you are doing a mobile or desktop application, you will want to test your application on several devices. So you have two options there. Basically, you will either have your own testing farm within your company. You will buy devices, you will set them up, you will update them, you will take care of the whole infrastructure, or you will use some of the popular cloud services, for example, SaaS Labs or Browser Stack or whatever there is. You will not have to manage buy devices, update, and so on. The company that holds the service will do that instead of you, but you will of course need to pay a higher price for that. So you will need to do the math at the end of the day. Okay, so let's move to the last section, tips and tricks. So if I could share only one tip with you, it would be this one. Start with test automation on time. This is often mistake, because when the project starts, nobody is thinking about test automation a lot. So the focus is to create an MVP, to create customers. Will I be able to sell my product? Will I be able to earn money, and so on? So that is the main focus at the beginning. The project is still small, so usually testing is put aside. We have time, we can do it manually so far, and we will see what will happen in future. Then test automation gets forgotten for a certain period of time, and then suddenly the problems are beginning to happen. Production failures, broken builds, you cannot test enough before you release, and teams are figuring out that their test automation is not appropriate for their current product. They are lagging behind in terms of test automation. Then the panic begins. They're trying to invest in tools, in people, in teams, but you cannot basically you cannot keep up with your product, since your product is still in development. So they're having some transitional period where they are taking consequences of missing the proper test automation, in terms of losing money or losing customers or stressed development teams and similar. Next, treat your test automation as a development project. I already mentioned that most likely your automated tests will be written as a code. Be aware that test automation is a software. So when you are building test automation, you are building a software that will test another software. So you are having another software development project in parallel with your product. So make sure that you are treating your test automation as a development project. What does this mean? You need a good coding practices. You need to implement coding standards, version control, good coding design patterns, good test automation design patterns, and similar. If you want stable test automation, and if you want your test automation to bring money and value to you, you need to treat it in a proper way, since otherwise you will have issues with your test automation. You will have fails, false alerts, you will get frustrated, and you will again have to invest some money and effort to fix that. So it is much better to start implementation of test automation in a proper way from day one. Next step is don't take shortcuts. This is basically related to the previous slide, where very often development teams don't want to invest in skills or infrastructure or tools or whatever. They usually invest in tools, but they are forgetting about infrastructure and skills. Then they are trying to compensate that with some magic tools that are sold as a artificial intelligence miracles, record and playback, codeless test automation and stuff. And teams are naive and they think that that buzzwords will help them without any additional aspects of proper test automation, but soon enough they're figuring out that those tools solely cannot help them to build a proper test automation. So some technologies like artificial intelligence, for example, that's a hot topic now, can and will help you with your test automation to a certain degree, but don't expect that it will solve all your test automation problems. That will never happen. Next, reevaluate your test automation strategy regularly. So as your project goes on, the certain circumstances are changing. So the market is changing, your product is changing, tools are changing, technologies are changing, people are changing in your project as well. A lot of things are changing, so your test strategy needs to be a living thing as well. So from time to time, just stop, take a step back and take a look. Is your current test automation strategy still the most appropriate test automation strategy for your current circumstances? Because very often it's not. You have different skills, there are some better tools, you don't need something anymore, you can remove it, you can change something, add something, and so on and so on. So there is a lot of aspects that can be improved from time to time. So once you have your test automation strategy, don't let it be set in stone. Reconsider your test automation strategy from time to time and be able to provide the highest possible value at a given moment for your test automation. Next, manage your test data properly. This is very often mistake of development teams. And it is very expensive mistake, honestly, because let's describe it this way. You are feeding your test automation with your test data. So it's like a fuel for your test automation. If you have a proper test data that you will give to your test automation, you will get the desired value. Your tests will work as expected. You will be able to uncover correct information. You will have a good test. But if you are not able to provide the correct data to your test automation, in best case, your test automation will not provide the maximum value that you expect. And in the worst case, your test automation will be completely worthless. So pay attention to your test data, invest time and invest effort in your test data. Analyze what kind of test data do you need to have? Prepare good test data, prepare the correct amount of test data. That's all a complex process. It takes effort, it takes money, but that is the part of test automation. Test data is the essential part of test automation. So make sure that you have the production-like test data. So analyze your users, analyze your production environments, and make sure that you copy that data model that your users are having in your test automation, because it is a very often mistake that wrong data is used for test. Some data structures and data sets that are never ever used on your production environment. So you're basically not covering the realistic use cases with your test automation, and that test automation will not return an expected value. That's why I'm repeating once again, take care of your test data, invest time and money in the analysis, prepare good test data, because that investment will return in the end. Okay, I think we have more than enough time for questions.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Aleksandar. You talked about taking shortcuts, and the question is, how likely is that to happen in the teams, maybe the teams you work with, and what do people expect when they go into test automation? Can you share some examples of your cases that you've seen?
The answer to your first question is it is extremely likely that teams will take shortcuts. So I think in 80% of the teams that I were part of, teams were trying to take shortcuts when it comes to test automation. Now, what kind of shortcuts? Smaller or larger, but they were trying to take them. Let's say the most extreme examples are the ones that I mentioned on the slide. So artificial intelligence powered test automation tools, then some unrealistic waste of money and lose of time. It takes certain time for you to see if the tool is appropriate or not, couple of months at least, and then teams are figuring out that they basically wasted some amount of money for that and certain amount of time, of valuable time, in an improper test automation. Those are, let's say, huge and major mistakes and shortcuts. Some smaller shortcuts are savings in terms of those three aspects and prerequisites for test automation. So when teams are trying to save either on people, either on tools, or either on infrastructure. So it is very rare that teams are aware of all three aspects and that they are treating all three aspects completely same and with a great caution. They are usually going lower in investment for some of the aspects, and that's of course having its negative consequences in the end.
And when you first started, back in the days when you started with the test automation and performance testing, what was the challenges that or mistakes that you made, and that you can maybe now, you talked about some challenges of that, but that you can maybe point out to the people who are maybe just starting. They do QA, but maybe they're not into test automation that much at this point, and then they want to take a step further. So what are the main, I don't know, examples that you can give them, or advices that you can give them to be better or to start in the appropriate way?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind, and that mistake is happening to a lot of people, especially to beginners in test automation, is everything trying to automate every tests on the UI level, so end-to-end test automation. You are not usually at start you are not familiar with the different layers of your application, with the structure of other test types that you can cover and you can use. You are only seeing the surface, you are seeing the UI, and you want to automate as much as you can on the UI level. You are having a huge test suite, but they are not valuable. It doesn't make sense for a lot of things to automate on the UI level. As I mentioned, they are expensive. They are usually flaky because you are still inexperienced in writing good tests. They are failing. People are losing confidence, and it's basically a trap for every test automation engineer, first and basic trap. So expand, let's say, your views. Make sure to know which technologies and which layers you have underneath, which tests there are, what can you test on which layer. And when you go to end-to-end test automation, make sure you're using good practices, valuable tests, create a stable test automation so you don't have to tomorrow invest time in cleaning up your own mess. That's the first mistake that I made. The second mistake that I made, and I also mentioned this in the previous slide, is the test data. I didn't understand the importance of test data. I was using some random stuff to feed my test automation, and combined with the first mistake that I was making, it was disaster. So it was a high effort, low value, a lot of wasted money, a lot of wasted time, basically from my side. So that's my message to all young test automation engineers. Be aware of those two things, and make sure that you know how your application works, to know which data to use good practices, invest in your skills, in your coding skills, in your tools, skills, in knowing your test application under test, underlying technology protocols and stuff, because you need to have a high understanding of how application works, how tool work, how your team work, how your data work, in order to create good, meaningful, and valuable test automation.
Thank you. You have a lot of interesting and really useful tips and tools that you shared with us during this session. So I'm sure that a lot of people will find useful things and that can help them improve their work. We will of course share this with people who watched it, so they can watch it again. They can see all of the tools and tricks that you mentioned. So I really appreciate that. And I would like to thank you for joining us on the Regional Scrum Gathering. I hope you had a nice time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah, you mentioned my tips and tricks. Whoever wants to discuss anything further regarding the test automation or performance testing with me, don't hesitate to contact me. Here you have a different links. Pick which one you want to use to contact me. I will be happy to discuss further any questions or concerns or different topics that you have. That's it. Thank you very much once again, and have a nice day and a nice weekend.
Thank you, Aleksandar.